Welcome to the show today. Today I have Agustin Musi on the show, and he's the founder and CEO of Flyerbee. And I'm very excited to dive into your story, hear a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. You had your fair share of companies that you founded along the way, and certainly a couple of lessons that you learned as well along the way. So thank you so much for being here, Agustin. Maybe we can go right into your story a little bit. So can you share maybe one or two defining moments along the way that really shaped you as a person, as a human being?
Yeah, that's well. First of all, I should say thanks a lot for inviting me to the conversation with you. It's a pleasant opportunity. Probably the first most defining opportunity is a little bit embarrassing, but the start of my, let's say, my early rejections might be the best way to say what shaped me. And back in middle school or so, I started a rocket club, and a bit of a not the most popular thing to do when you're a young kid, and this was kind of before nerds were cool. And so right around the 80s, the most popular things were things like Wham and dancing and good clothes and rockets, and anything. No one was excited about that. So I didn't make a lot of friends, but what I did notice was sometimes that reward journey is kind of lonely at the beginning, and I guess I sort of discovered that was something that I was okay with, is not always not doing the popular thing, but doing the thing you're passionate about, and I guess that was probably the most defining piece there. Is I didn't really assume that it was going to be. It wasn't like I was going to actually build a rocket to travel, but it was more that I was passionate about the science behind it.
I love, what you just said there, not doing the popular thing, but the thing you're passionate about. I think that's a really good slogan, I would say. It's a really powerful statement there. One thing I want to talk about is people, because sometimes along the way, people shape us as well. Do you remember in situations where you feel like there were some people that really shaped your journey as a human being, as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'd say family has the biggest impact on me as an entrepreneur. But as a background, almost everyone in my family is an entrepreneur, and that's just been sort of the MO for everyone. What we do is build things, generally, and that's so my father and my mother both separately have their own businesses, and obviously my own behavior and the thing is shaped by your family sometimes, and so that was probably the most significant influence as far as people are concerned. But I think outside of the immediate family impact, there was quite a few years ago, there was someone I would consider kind of an early mentor. Wasn't necessarily allocated as a mentor. One of the challenging things to do is find good mentors, and as I started a position in a company, one very talented manager began to treat me a little bit more like a potential manager person, I guess I want to say like that, and really sort of set the bar a little higher for what I could achieve, and instead of just doing the work. So I would say that person, he was a manager at Autodesk, one of the companies I worked for when I was younger. So as a frame, that was kind of the position. But I put a lot of ownership on what shaped me from my family.
I love those two areas. I mean, one that I hear often as well is managers really good ones, actually the ones who really care, not just about themselves but also about the others, and I guess the greater good, you could say as well, and family. I want to stay a little bit with that drive there, with that reason behind it. I mean, if you had to pinpoint it, what would you say were some of the main reasons you decided to become an entrepreneur? You mentioned, yes, it's family, maybe it's in your DNA, but is there something more than just I'm maybe born like that?
Yeah, necessity is a really good reason. Sometimes I can say that every decision I've made to be an entrepreneur has been one where not only have I been motivated to build something, but also there's a literal hunger to what is my next career step going to be, or what are my choices going to be. And I think in as a principle, ideas are really easy to come about, and you just generally have all this energy. And I'm not sure that that's it's a calculated effort to say, because I've been a quote entrepreneur for years, like maybe since I was 7, and that's not really wearing the hat when it was really cool to do it. And I guess somehow it's just probably tied to people around you behaving in a way that says, okay, that's what everybody else says, but what do you think? And that, I don't want to call it rogue nature, but the tendency to sort of challenge authority and challenge ideas tends to be the motivator for deciding to be an entrepreneur. I mean, there's another side to it, which is that I think an entrepreneur's maybe often an accident of sorts. It's not really a calculated career choice, because I don't think, if anybody really understands what it is to be one, I don't think anybody really would want to. It's just, take everything that you love and put all your heart into it, and then maybe you might be successful with it, or maybe people will criticize you for every decision you make. I'm not sure. I think that's there's a glamour behind it, which came up with the 80s and the 90s, but I really don't think it's like a calculated career choice let's say as a motivator, as a prime motivator. Maybe money is, but I can't imagine that. But I think it's very high statistic failure, very high statistics of failures, and in startups and businesses that start from scratch, especially in Europe, even. But yeah, I hope I didn't answer that question for you.
Absolutely. One piece I also want to know a little bit more about is the sector, the industry, the field that you're in. So you're sort of in the intersection of tech and advertising. That's sort of like where you've been building things up very, very much in the recent years. What's the reasoning behind it? Like, what got you into that? Was it by accident? Was it by choice? Was it because of a bigger drive? Like, what's the reason behind it?
I'm going to say all of the above, just to kind of make the answer fun. The rationale for starting the business that I'm in at the moment, Flyerbee, was that we wanted to solve a different problem with a different project. We were trying to deal with the issue of privacy and personal data, and the importance of having high quality data about an individual, but not necessarily handing the keys of all of the identity and all the personal information just to have a single action, just to have a single result, which would be like, I want to wear a piece of clothing and I want it measured to me, but that doesn't mean that I need to hand my entire body scan over to a company so that they can make a product for me. So we started with the idea to build a privacy as a service system and a proxy for between customers and their companies. And in order to do that, we stumbled across the idea while building example companies and example data exchange models that advertising was one of those pieces that needed to be, had a problem to solve. And so that sort of kicked off the focus. I had a client in that area, and I had a little bit more insight into that area to sort of analyze that model and identify it. And I also wanted to help that client out and help, and give them something sort of, bigger scale to go after. So it was kind of a simultaneous play there. And of course, necessity was as well, because I've been running businesses in the past, and some of those businesses expire in their value over time. They're not doing the same thing anymore. So I started to leave some of those other businesses behind as well, hosting and consulting services and things in that nature. And I was really aiming towards a path towards product. So in that way, the advertising business became kind of an accident, and I stumbled across it in a way that had been sort of a quick study in the last 2-3 years or so. But Americans always have advertising in their blood somehow anyway, so we're not completely obscure. It's not off kilter to empathize with the constraints of advertising, or at least understand some of it. But really, where it became relevant was the centerpiece of privacy and the need for not taking raw data from individuals and just scraping it like you would if colonial powers would go into underdeveloped countries and rip out the raw resources. This is basically the world we live in at the moment for advertising. And with GDPR that came into place, a lot of people sort of raised their hands and said, hey, that's too much data, and you're not giving anybody any control over it. So, we looked at that as an opportunity, and this was a couple of years ago before kind of the push on privacy and the big anti-push on Facebook and Crew. So, I think that was an accident, but it's a very happy accident, because the more we got involved into it, the more we saw a massive potential to help things and really change things.
I love that, reasoning. It's lots of different things. It's usually not just one, and there's partly rational ones and partly emotional ones. So on that journey, you probably had a few interesting success stories and failures as well. And there's probably been a few lessons that you learned as well. So maybe you can pinpoint one specific lesson that you learned and maybe add a bit of context around it. Like, why was that so important and how did you learn that?
I am really learning every day exactly what I don't know, and it seems like that's a laundry list of amazing things. And so I can't say that I could pick one example and make it the pinnacle of anything, but I could give you the one that comes to mind, and maybe that's a starting position. When you're building a company for a partnership, you need, and it's this idea that somehow if you have a customer provider relationship, there's a value proposition you can present to a business to say, hey, this is your net return for even talking to us. And when you have a dependency on your customer, not just for them to pay a bill, but actually for them to sort of pivot and change behavior in some way, there are constraints that exceed the value proposition conversation. So, for example, we wanted to do something where we're helping to pivot an industry from one path towards another path. Not a transformation where they have to drop what they're doing and go somewhere, but you just have to kind of open a new door and present a new opportunity. And getting people to kind of slide that direction is not as obvious. Some feelings are that you can paint a good picture, and that the natural result would be that, oh, well, this is the picture. I can see that we're going to do some good business together as a partnership. We should go that way. And so I think in that way, I've kind of developed some learnings on that, some strong lessons about, regardless of what kind of dependency you have in the partnership, you really still have to push a hard value proposition as a customer relationship, even if you have this idea of shared value, and even if you can see that sort of, the journey together, you still have to kind of go in the front door like every other salesperson and pitch here's the 10 things you get for the one thing you give me, and that's a lesson, I guess. And, maybe that's something that is a little easier to do as a professional salesperson, or, as an excellent marketer. And I'm not sure I'm either of those two things, but I certainly have learned a little bit about that process.
Very interesting lesson learned, especially also about like educating a market, especially when you're doing something new. It's always a piece of the process, and most of the time today, it's always a piece of the process somehow. And especially when it involves a real innovation, something that really changes dramatically how something works, or actually the market and the behaviors and things like that. That is a very long-term vision, and I think being conscious about short-term versus long-term is sort of like what I heard in there. It's really about, if you go in that market and change behaviors and really make a bigger transition than just selling a product, so to say, that just makes things 2% better, then it's a bit of a longer transition as well, and it's different expectations that have to be handled as well, and also different ways of going about it. So that's a really big one. That's a really big one. Now, as an entrepreneur, you're always handling lots of different things. Usually, you're wearing lots of different hats, especially in the beginning. The topic is always either, it's sort of like a big uh, uh, difference. Some people say just focus, just do what you're best at and this, and then other entrepreneurs, they say, well, if you do that, you're never going to be successful. You got to be wearing all kinds of hats at the beginning and do everything until it's working and then hire people. Others say, no, you got to build it from the beginning with the right people, only do what you best. Look, so there's lots of different ways people talk about it, right? What's been your experience with this? And how do you work with that? If you have to wear different hats, do you say, well, I actually have to do that? Do you work with this differently? How do you go about being an entrepreneur, I guess, is what I want to ask.
Well, that's certainly an opinion issue. I think everyone has opinions about the best way to be an entrepreneur based on their context or their history or their opinions of what they watched or something. For me, I think it's clear that one of the biggest challenges I have is focus in general. And I mean that with respect to everyone who's ever asked me to please just focus on this one thing. And I guess for something, I consider myself to be some variation, some variant of ADHD, which is sort of by nature someone who's unable to sort of pick one thing at the same, just focus here. And I'm not, there's maybe 12 types of that or 7 types of that. So I don't want to, put myself into a category that says, he can't focus because he's got, 10 screens or something. But what the issue is for me, I'm very comfortable changing hats all the time. That's kind of that's the place where I feel that's my daily life. That's my everyday scenario. So I've never really had a situation where I feel stressed that I have to change hats. The most significant issue is that it's very easy to see how much you need to be efficient in a specific area, and when the business begins to grow, that's when you start to realize that your ability to change hats doesn't mean your ability to execute on those things to the degree so you actually have to kind of adjust your way of dealing with the hat changing to identify a resource that's good at executing that task, motivate them and point them in the right direction efficiently, which I think is a big deal. And communication becomes one of the big transformations there, right? Because if you can change hats, that's great, but that's under the assumption you have tons of time to do things. And really what you have to be able to do is understand what needs to get done and then be very effective in your communication that brings not just that one person or one team with you, but the group of people with you so that they can empathize with that hat changing. And that's something where when a small, when your company's like 5, 10 people, it's a completely different story than when you're 15, 20, or 30, and then obviously 50 or 100, but I have yet to have experience in that category. I have not grown a business past 30, 35 people so far, so I'm sure I have plenty in front of me in that regard. So that's the answer to that question, I guess. I'm more inclined to say that the answer for me is learn to change hats and learn to communicate very effectively with that hat changing skill. But that's not for everybody.
I know also what I got from this is really about understanding the difference of when you're an entrepreneur, understanding the difference of doing it yourself versus sort of like changing hats and having the right people on board as well. And I guess that changes with each layer of leadership as well along the way. And like one thing I want to dive a little bit more into is this definition of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, there's lots of different definitions as well. Some people call it just a startup, other people just call it entrepreneurship. People have different, things that they put around these words. For startup, maybe this is all about, starting a tech or a website in your garage, trying to make it the next Facebook. And I feel like over the past few years, this whole idea of entrepreneurship has a little bit become like accepted by the broader range of people as a more of an understanding, maybe of the way of life or whatever. What specifically means entrepreneurship to you? Like, if you had to put a definition to entrepreneurship, what would you say that means?
Yeah, I'm inclined to think of the joke where George Bush or Shrub Jr. said the French don't have a word for entrepreneurship. Just for some odd reason, I thought about that. I mean, it really is sort of self-defined in my view, which is it's someone who's building a venture, and that venture could theoretically be a nonprofit two-person organization that's changing the world with those two people, or maybe even theoretically it could be a micro business of one. But I think it's an abstract idea, and I think entrepreneurship, what has changed dramatically, is a recognition and sort of an acceptance that that's kind of a job career choice potentially. And I think that's been sort of that's a macro level shift, meaning that it was, if you were telling people, in the 50s or the 60s or 70s, depending on what country you're from, that you're doing something out on your own, there's a lot of stigma that comes with that risk potentially, and a lot of theoretical fear that once you do that, you're going to spend something and no one's going to want to hire you. You didn't take a career track. Why not take a safe route? And I think a lot of that safety dialogue has slipped away, and since the 80s mostly, and people don't really think of the company person for 10, 15, 20 years. And so that sort of went in connection with this sort of up and coming path towards entrepreneurship, or even for that matter, the freelance contractor who then wears the hat and says, oh, I kind of manage my own client base and so on. But for me, I think it stems from the idea that you're trying to raise something from the ground, literally, and I'm sure there are plenty of entrepreneurs who have enough cash in their pocket that it's not really raising it from the ground. It still is literally, didn't exist before, but I think the resources that you have available to you, both in network and in financing, can determine a lot of your success in that category. And so for me, that entrepreneurship is why that's the entire spectrum of, previous entrepreneurs that have 50 million in the bank versus the entrepreneur that has, the $5,000, fistful of cash and is going to go change the world with his lemonade stand or whatever. There's a huge spectrum. I like the idea definitely to avoid thinking of entrepreneurship and startups as tech focused, because I know that data is pretty much the key resource for the planet at the moment. I understand that inherently, and I understand that tech, basically every company is a tech company, but it's not it's like saying I'm going to build a business with defined around the pencil that I use to write with, right? Or it'd be like the old story of like saying, I'm a mobile company, which means that, you everything you do is tied through the mobile phone. I get that, but it's really myopic in that way. And every startup has the potential to be phenomenal if they make juice very well and tell a great story. I don't know if you know the Innocent brand, for example, that got picked up by Coca-Cola. Their basic key issue is their ability to market and tell a story from a product's perspective and get people kind of emotionally connected with the product. And I think that's the story. So that's the answer to that question. Hopefully not too long-winded there.
No, it's perfect because it's a very philosophical question as well and a very deep question. And the last one, maybe even more up in the sky. So if you had a magic wand, imagine you're a magician now for a second, and you had a magic wand and you could wave that and wish for anything you wanted in the world, what is something that you would wish for that could impact, that could multiply your impact at least 10 times on the work you do, on the industry you're in, or even on the world?
Well, I have to separate those two a little bit from what I would love to have the power to do on a personal level and have the sort of the theoretical influence to achieve versus the other side, which is what can affect my business and what decisions I'm making in my business now. And so the story would be kind of, I'm just going to put it into two quick categories. And that's the one for sure. We need to improve the quality of life for a lot of people. And the long-term sustainable picture has to do with, what cities are going to look like and what people's jobs and purposes are going to be in the next wave of industry. And I think a lot of that definition is tied to things like natural resources and what, and how we're sharing resources and how, wealth consolidation. So if I had the magic wand, I would start putting my energy towards those decisions, those factors. And I think a lot of people have ideas about how to fix that. And I think that, I'm sure that, the road to hell is paved with the greatest intentions, and a lot of decisions are being made on this idea that they could somehow solve these problems with a polarized path. But I guess in my view, we have some really big challenges coming in front of our society as a whole, or humans as a whole, the planet as a whole. And I think that would be my primary magic wand focus, I guess I would say. But applied to the business, I guess there's some areas where I really see some potential growth of value for some magic wand behavior, and it just comes down to speed and scale for teams within my organization that I'm currently building. That's where I see some of my biggest constraints is scaling the projects that we're doing and really growing. And we have this really strong and exciting path, and it's a hard path to explain to people. A lot of people don't get it, and I understand why. It's partially me, and it's partially the complexity of what we're trying to achieve. So in those two categories, that would be my wand perspective. One for actually making changes for the planet and for people, and more than people too. And then the other side, of course, for the business and where it's going.
I love also that you separated that because there's like a way bigger picture and then a little bit more of a down to earth one. Really love that. So thank you so much, Agustin, for diving into your story, diving into some of the lessons that you learned along the way. We're going to link below this video to some of the resources like the company website, your LinkedIn profile, so people can check you out, learn more about what you're up to, and also connect with you, of course. So once again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.